Patrick Katabua is going to lead the Q&A session with questions that we fielded from the audience. Patrick and Karen have been fielding the questions. We have quite a few questions. We'll deal with the questions, and then if time permits, we'll have an open discussion. I'd rather do that than discuss every question for 15 minutes and then only have time for 2 questions. So if you will be sensitive to that, I'll hand it over to you, Patrick. Patrick's in Johannesburg, by the way. Is that correct?
Great. Thanks, Steve. Yes. From DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo originally, but based out in Johannesburg, South Africa. So yeah, thanks to all the panelists and to the different contributions we've been having in the chat. I think it would be great for all the panelists to please turn on your cameras if you're still able to do so. And whilst we ask the different questions, the rest of the delegates feel free to raise your hands, and you can contribute where possible. If you've got specific comments to add, I will be monitoring the hands together with Karen. So just to kick us off, it seems as if there's a debate around who is driving the S. Is it the investors? Is it the developers, or is it the occupiers? And the hunch is that it's possibly more the occupiers and the investors who are driving the S, and in turn the developers are then responding to this call. So the occupiers, especially the corporate occupiers, seem to be fairly in tune or conscious about the social aspect, and we are starting to see it now with debates around returning back to the office, and whether we're going to be having centralized offices or decentralized offices much closer to the place of residence of employees in order to meet some of the S elements. So could we have some initial views or comments on that? So centralization versus decentralization, and how that touches on the S part. Possibly Paul, from an investor perspective.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think there are strong questions about whether or not decentralization works. I mean, different for different industries, but certainly our read is that economics are going to push us back to the office, and the only I suppose the only question we have is that just how hard are developers, and by extension investors, going to have to work to deliver the sort of space and the sort of experiences that occupiers are going to want to encourage their staff to return to working together. I mean, the key weakness, and again, there varies industry to industry, but the key weakness of working on a decentralized basis is that to unlock the productivity benefits that we have of working together, we need to do that. We need to work together. We need to be in the room where decisions are being made, and a decentralized approach risks undermining that, and therefore risks undermining the productivity benefits that we can get from working together. Which, so fundamentally, businesses are going to have to work harder to deliver space that encourages people to want to work together again, in order to access those productivity benefits.
Yeah,
I'm going to add to that, as one of the world's largest owners of offices, Allianz Real Estate, with our 40 billion in offices. We're pretty confident, and again, so you might take all of this with a pinch of salt on the grounds that we own offices.
You think we might be biased, Megan?
Well, exactly. So let's just get that out there. So we're pretty confident that people will go back to the office, particularly in high density cities, because in high density cities, you have small apartment size, you have probably better public transport. And the other reason is you've already got rationalized office space. So you've got offices which were already open plan and fairly dense. And the other reason we think people will go back to the office, or rather why we think we want to own offices in high density cities, is if your particular tenant, if their industry has gone into decline, for example, an airline during the pandemic, you will have more alternative users of office space. So high density cities are talent hubs where smart young people will want to go. And the sorts of names, Paul and I, I'm sure we're all in line with this, occupiers want to be in city centres because from an ESG net carbon zero perspective, they need to be in locations where there's public transport. You can't have people driving around in cars sensibly. So we're going to be in the heart of city centres, and we think we're going to be in fairly dense city centres.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because I think we are starting to see some things come through the data. So certainly of the duration of my career up until this cycle, vacancy rates pushing up to the sort of the 8% plus level in the city into double digits. It's always signaled that grade A rents were going to fall. 10, 15, 20% declines were not uncommon. And the equilibrium level changes market to market around the world, but the same concept applies. Economics 101 applies. It's not working that way now. This link between aggregate market vacancy and grade A rents, there's no definitive evidence yet, but it appears to at least have been weakened. And the best evidence for that is in central London, where we're seeing vacancy rates in the city up at the low double digits, similar high single digits in the West End. Those sort of levels before you'd have seen those sort of material rental declines. But the best quality space, rents are going up. And I think that tells us something that it may tell us that maybe that the pain of that rental decline is still being experienced by the office sector as a whole, but it's not being experienced by the better quality space, which I think means that that occupiers and by extension tenants are effectively voting with their checkbooks. They're prioritizing space. And if just one final statistic to throw at that, if you look at the percentage of new of vacancy that is new in central London, it's at an all-time low. The demand is weighing on that higher quality end of the sector, which is materializing itself in rental growth numbers. So as a real estate researcher, came to this through econometrics. My models don't work anymore. Because there's been a structural change.
Paul, controversially, Elaine doesn't agree with you. So let's have Elaine.
Good. Fantastic.
I know, it's good, isn't it?
Disagreeing with Elaine. I would be worried if she felt.
We're not supposed to talk right now, but I do think, Paul, and just quickly summarize my op-ed.
It's always been a challenge for you, Elaine.
Depends on your age, depends on the workforce, and I clearly think the cat is out of the bag for anyone that has a large workforce in the ages of 25 to 55, actually 65, as they're doing childcare and elder care. Certainly here in the U.S., but I think around the world, this is.
I don't think Elaine, with all respect, I don't think we can. Either of us can use the term certainly in this. We just simply don't.
You're right.
With evidence.
Yeah.
It's too early to tell.
We have different theses. My bet is that economics will out, and that those people who are expressing those sort of preferences will choose not to afford them, because ultimately it will cost them in their pocket. Particularly as senior leaders go back to the office. But I might be wrong. In which case, I'll buy you a beer at the next conference.
I guess it's a fairly complex scenario because for about 2 years we've been forced to work from home, and I think in the beginning of that period, it was a little bit frustrating, but then people got used to it and they kitted out they work from home office. They got very comfortable. Those with young children were able to spend a lot more time with them. But then there's also that debate around how that impacts on productivity. A couple of corporates have now started softly requesting the employees to get back to the traditional workplace. a lot of the young people really enjoy it because they can then get mentorship, they can learn from, they can embrace the corporate culture. And I think it's much quicker to also grow career-wise when you are physically in the office as opposed to being at home. So some interesting dynamics there, how occupiers are looking at improving the social aspect by utilizing the real estate. But there's a couple of hands, so let's go to Francois, who's been quite patient whilst we're having this debate. With you, Francois.
Thank you, Patrick. Just 3 points from my side. The first point that you made is an interesting one. Where is it coming from? Is it government? Is it the user? Or is it, and which we may well have, either you argue that the millennials who are going to be paying towards their pension and will have a different view from, either you say, well, it will still be about the return, but maybe not. But the question is, where's it coming from? Well, COP26, for example, influenced people, I think, and the discussion and what the scientists, the 1.5 degrees and the E. Maybe we haven't had a COP26 on social. Once we do that, we may have a different view on it. So where's it coming from? Yes, you can argue it's coming from government, but I'm not that convinced about that. And I think that may well change, that it's coming not from the top, but from the bottom, where asset managers will be told by their pension funds who are investing via them, this is the way I'd like to go. And I think that, so I think it'll be interesting. My second point is, and I'm hearing the comment about the office, but what I'm also hearing the comment is people say, I actually want to go to my office. I have no problem with the office. I've got a major problem with getting to the office. That's where the problem lies. It's spending 3 hours, half my day. That's what I don't want. So the question is maybe it's not so much about the office, but where the offices are vis-a-vis where people live, satellite offices. And so I think that we need to distinguish between the office and the social issues that have been created by where our offices are and the expectations people to drive. So I think it's important to differentiate the two. And then I'm going to leave it with my third point is I think we've got some problems in our real estate. Let me put it this way. When I book a hotel room for 2 nights, I don't ask myself how many square meters I'm renting for 2 nights. That doesn't come across. I'm buying into a service, into a locality. And I think that what we're going to start seeing in the property market, yes, there is GLA behind it. I think we all understand that. There is square meters or square foot behind it. But I think we're going to see property companies acting much more like hotel groups with branding. Half the offices I walk in, I wouldn't know who is the owner. And many owners say, I actually don't want anybody to know who I am because I don't want anybody to get back to me at, let's put a management company in between. But I think that the way we think socially about space, I think changes it, which then means you can have 2 hotels next door to each other on the street offering very different prices, whether you're a low hotel or a high. But so I think it comes back to the social issues. It's how the built environment is connected with the built with society. I don't think that. I think if you spoke, I could be wrong. There are others who are much closer to it than I am, who are investors in it. I'm a bit of an academic in that respect. But I think it's understanding that relationship. And look, it doesn't work for everybody. Patrick, you know it. In South Africa, when you live and you work, it's nice if you go to Jujina office in a nice flat or house. It's something else when you have 3 screaming children around your dinner table trying to work. The office becomes a bit more attractive. But can we make it easy for people to get to where they want to work? I think that's what we need to do. And that's the social issue. Okay, let me stop. Thank you.
And I think that is where there's a lot of discussion taking place now. The one being when you're in the big metro, you are definitely closer to the transport nodes, so you're responding to the S element. But if you've got a decentralized office closer to the residential areas, you're also somewhat responding to the S, because then the travel time to the office is much shorter. And I guess this is an evolving discussion. Gunther, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Well, I think it will be neither one or the other. I think it will be a blend of the two. What we will probably see is some more flexible arrangements, and we already see this developing, that people don't have their assigned desk that they move into the office. On some days of the week, they arrange their meetings during these days. The other days they stay at home, work from home or from wherever they want. So I think we'll just see more flexibility in this workforce. The other aspect I think I would like to bring in is that well, from an office real estate point of view, of course, this is important. But when you look at the different jobs, it's a relatively small segment. So there are many people who work in jobs where there is simply not that flexibility, where they have their assigned place in the factory or wherever. So it is a relatively small segment in society. Of course, it's important for when you invest in offices, and you need to respond to that. And the driving force, I think, well, the commute, and it will be the demand of the workers and companies who expect their office workers to be in the office 5 days a week will have a hard time recruiting people, because people will just require to have this flexibility, and because they've been trained now for 2 years.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for those contributions. Lori, see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple additional points. I think to Paul's earlier point about that breakdown between, Class A rents, I think it is a social piece, because I think the priority is health and wellness. And I think some of the nicest properties are checking the health and wellness box. So people go to work and their health and wellness is maintained. Either it's because they feel the place is healthy from I won't catch COVID, to the kombucha on tap that used to be the term of health and wellness 3 years ago, to fitness, wellness, and all the likes. So I think that's just that flight to quality is probably just what's maintaining the rents in those really nice spaces. But then in terms of, to Gunther's point, I think it's so true that it's one thing to commute. It's another thing to commute during rush hour. And I think that the flexibility and we're all adults, right? What we've proven in COVID is that we get the job done. And we need agency and say and ability to have the authority to kind of dictate. For those of us who have that luxury in our work to kind of dictate when we do our work and how, if I take a call at 7 a.m. and I drive in at 10, does that mean I wasn't working at 7 a.m? No, it just means that I can meet at my desk in 15 minutes if I leave my house at 10. I get the same FaceTime. It's not the same way it was 10 years ago, where I'm at my desk at 8 and I leave at 5. And I think we all just kind of need to take space and time and stretch it in all different ways, and make it so that the office works for us in the way that we need it to, and get what we need at the times we need.
That's so true, and then that's perhaps one of the things that COVID has changed in that, pre-COVID we had good technology, but we didn't know it worked. We had parts of the workforce that were trusted to do jobs in the times that they wanted to do it. They had agency, but other parts simply weren't trusted to have that agency. So now that genie's out of the bottle. And we've proved that we can keep our businesses running while working from home. That means that we're not going to work in the same way that we did before. But it's not necessarily correct to leap from that to say that we're not going to need offices.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's so true.
Ways.
Yeah, and I think we talk about the carrot and the stick, right? Do you force people back? And one of my colleagues was like, you just hit people on the head with the carrot. You know, you got to make that space compelling enough that they want to come back, but they can come back on their terms and with maybe some guidelines, but you find that middle where everyone's at the table kind of co-creating the best solution.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, you know, one statistic that really resonates with me is that CEOs, there's a wonderful KPMG survey that looks at CEO preferences. And at the beginning of the crisis, 69% of CEOs thought they were going to reduce the scale of their office footprint. That number's now down to 17%. And that's partly because, you know, I think CEOs have recognized that there are these economic benefits to having people working together. So if you take that together with the economic benefit, with the, you know, the agency arguments that you've been making, that means that companies are going to have to work harder to encourage people to come back to the office. So that means that, you know, we as investors are going to have to deliver space that checks more boxes. The sort of the battery hen type approach that we've gotten used to, particularly in London and in some other markets, is just simply not going to cut it anymore. And the buildings that don't deliver those additional check boxes are going to suffer from accelerated obsolescence. And that's the risk going forward for office investors. You know, there are great opportunities there, but there are opportunities if you're able to navigate that complexity, if you're able to navigate the changes that have happened as a result of, or have been accelerated as a result of COVID.
Yeah, great. I think we've touched quite decently on the office component and how that can be utilized to improve the S in the ESG. There was another question which speaks to social value creation and whether risk mitigation is possibly a priority to drive social value creation. And we have seen this at play with communities that are embedded in neighborhood projects. And they evidently then ensure that the asset is functional and holds value. Is that more an E than an S focus? So in other words, looking at social value creation, does that lean more towards the E than the S? Yeah, Francois, your hand is up.
Look, Patrick, when I started earlier, I made the point that the wealth of a country is not GNP. It's its capital, manufactured capital, the buildings, if you want to call it that, our natural capital, human capital, and social capital. And the issue with capital is that you will get a return from a capital. I mean, that's the idea. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, we know what the return is of manufactured capital, our buildings. What returns do we get from human capital? Natural
Keep it
capital.
brief, Patrick. This is a Patrick Burley show.
Okay. And so what I am saying is that social capital, the investment and the creation of social capital that you are raising, Patrick, is we will see the returns of it. But if we don't create that social capital, we won't see it. It's an investment that we want to make with a return attached to it.
Great. Thanks, Francois. Any other comments around?
Anybody can jump in. Anybody in the audience can jump in for this Q&A, either to ask questions through the chat or verbally, and anybody can express a view. This is the sort of half hour when we can all participate. Oh,
yeah, we are monitoring the screen for hands. So yeah, if anyone has a comment, feel free to raise hands. It's not only for the panelists. Okay, whilst we ponder on that one, there's another one that was shared on the chat. So are public-private partnerships the way to achieve socially responsible investing? Because generally the S is always a government issue, and industry is generally focused on financials or profits and returns. So there may be a slight disconnect between the focus of government as opposed to the focus of investors. So do PPPs, public-private partnerships, possibly combine the solutions to achieve more socially responsible investing. Yes, Megan.
So one of the jobs I did when I finished being an academic and went back to industry was to work on UK private finance initiative deals, which were a public-private partnership. And I did two projects. One was Romford Hospital and the other one was Salford Schools. Now, one of the issues, my job was to work out the unitary payment mechanism. So if a section of the school or the hospital failed, then how much should be deducted from the unitary payment? And the unitary payment is kind of like the rent that the school or the hospital were paying. So they built Romford Hospital, 659 beds, huge deal. The problem came, the government changed the rules in healthcare almost every second week. So you'd signed up for these 30-year contracts with social components to them, and almost immediately the government changed the social components. And it could be advances in healthcare, it could be the number of beds you'd have in a room, it could be whether you had mixed gender wards. So one of the problems that there was what's acceptable in a social component changes really fast, or certainly in the healthcare and the education sector, to the point where they didn't get a great rap. There were all sorts of problems with PFI contracts. I can see that time of kind of public-private partnership might work for things like roads, where things don't change very much, but anything which had a big social component to it actually became quite problematic quite quickly. So I'd start that with a word of caution.
Yeah. Are you able to give us a bit more insight into the type of problems that could be faced or that were faced in those type of projects?
So it would be quite legitimate. So the NHS might, which is the National Health Service for the UK, might issue new guidelines around patient care, how things should be done. That would be in conflict to what was written in the PFI contract about what we as the kind of owner or landlord for the hospital had to provide. So then as soon as the NHS wanted to implement the change, or the hospital staff wanted to implement the change that the patient care guidelines said they had to implement, it meant that we, the landlord of the hospital, could charge money to help implement these changes. So there was an immediate problem between what had been written in the contract to make returns and this kind of social piece. And there was a lot of pressure to kind of be nice to the NHS. Well, it wasn't their fault that they changed this patient care system. But fundamentally, you've written a contract with investors, and the investors, which I think Gunter mentioned at the start, and Francois, we all have a fiduciary duty to the mums and dads who are the pension holders in some of these funds. So then you've got a trade-off. So it's not like we're evil, nasty capitalists. We're protecting mums and dads' pension money that are in the sort of pension funds or the insurance company funds. So where do you go with this? And the answer is you have to follow the contract. So almost immediately, the landlords, like the company I work for, could then charge quite a lot of money to the NHS to implement the changes, because that was what was in the contract. And we have a fiduciary duty to our mum and dad pensioners who are in the funds.
Yeah. So effectively, the social risk, social investing may increase when doing a public-private partnership as opposed to a private deal.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's just about risk and uncertainty in the future, particularly where you get social things. And I suppose I'm really highlighting the issue around healthcare and education, where there's constantly evolving ideas about how we should move forward.
Yeah, thank you. Elaine, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it was really interesting, Megan. And I think I put it in earlier this morning in terms of the institutional investment community as well. We do have to be really careful because, again, as Megan just pointed out, the institutional investment community is trying to make sure they're protecting, if it's pension funds, trying to make sure they're protecting the fund. The same thing with the insurance, and the same thing, with investors into REITs and corporates, et cetera. But when you encourage them to get engaged in some of these social issues, which I agree, it's super important, it can backfire on you. And I think right now we're hitting that, at least here in the US, with our seniors housing. We made a push. I helped write the white paper. I was super excited about it to try to get more money into retirement communities because I knew I was going to have to retire. And my mother had a horrible experience, as did many of my friends as parents. But getting that money in, particularly, and again, Karen, forgive me, being a REIT person, a lot of it was REITs and they got in, but they're worried about the bottom line. So they reduced the staffing. So they cut this and cut that. And then COVID comes along, and who is the biggest impacted population, at least here in our country, is the 65 pluses, is our congregate care. And it's because they weren't set up to take care of the socially, they were meant to, but then they were not set up to. So, I mean, I think the government has to play a role. I think public-private partnerships is what we're going to have to work on. But as Megan points out, we have to be very, very careful how the rules get changed, because when you change the rules of the game, I mean, my sister worked for equivalent of NI, well, not equivalent of NIH. She worked for the Hospital Association, and they couldn't get all the hospitals together to do something about records. You know, stupid system here in the US, we don't have electronic records. I mean, it's unbelievable, and we're working on it now, but we do not have it. They couldn't get everybody to agree because the government was changing the rules every other day, and they would have calls with the federal government on Obamacare, but nobody knew what the rules were going to be. And so nobody would do anything, because they're not going to spend $1 billion getting the system up only to be told, oh, you got to use a different system. So, I mean, it is super complex and super difficult, but super important. That's all.
Yeah, quite a complex one, and a fine balancing act is also needed there to get it right. There was a comment, and this one I guess is for the academics and professors in the room. It was from Patrick Morawaka, and he says, how can we collaborate to gather and access data to do research on the subject within real estate and set up theoretical frameworks? So the suggestion is for sources and collaborations. Where can we have access to publishings and sources of data that touches on the social aspect of ESG? So he's pretty much looking for different sources and data places that he can go to for information. Gunther?
Well, this is pretty difficult to answer at this general level. But what I wanted to say is, number one, academics are usually pretty good in collaborating and sharing things. So I think the advice I could give at this general level is to look at this screen here, look at this group of people, look at other networks, and just approach people and say, I'm looking for this and this and this. And of course, the more specific you can be there, the better is your chance to get a positive response. So if you just say, I need data, then everyone will say, okay, the person should make up his mind what type of data and in what form and so on and so on. So that's the one point. The other point, I think, is, and that goes to ERES, that goes to IRES, that goes to the scientific community, which is represented here. I think we should try to make more of our research results and more of our research data publicly available. There are great instruments, there's great software, there are great institutional arrangements for all these things. It's just the thing that we are not implementing this. And I really think that this is the future form of academic publishing, to make things publicly available. With the technology, it's actually a piece of cake to do that. So these are my two points in this context.
Great, thanks for that. And as feedback to Patrick, then I think it's about making the ask of the question more specific, and reaching out to some of the panelists for additional data. Francois, you're on mute.
Is that, especially if in our discussion on S, we are low on data at the moment. But I expect that in the years to come, with the data being collected by MSCI on ESG and others, that we will find ourselves in a much stronger position on data. I think that we are in the same place with non-financial data than where we were with financial property data in the 60s or somewhere. And I think that we'll, so if you're asking the question about data, you know, even from the academic perspective, I think we're not on the starting blocks, but it's early days on all of this.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I guess the more we speak about it and the more forums similar to these we have, the more data we generate as well. There was a comment from David Akinwamide. He says, should we not look at linking the S to climate change? And because as climate changes, the S could result in allowing us to have interdisciplinary approach to mental health, as well as being as well as creating healthier buildings. So linking mental health to healthier buildings. Paul, you've got a comment on this one, or was it the previous?
It was the previous one. So I'll be frightfully rude just to take us back from that interesting question. But I mean, in some ways, the data problem should almost be solved by definition, because you know, we're under significant pressure as investors to prove that we're doing a good job on ESG. You know, therefore, we're being pushed to compare what we're doing to some form of standard, some form of benchmark. So over time, that will almost inevitably lead us to the production of benchmarks and the production of data. So you know, the direction we're traveling in will solve the data problem by definition, because we will be, you know, economically incentivized, you know, to provide those data. Indeed, we are incentivized to provide those data now. So we just got to, you know, wait for that to work through the system. Oh, sorry to, you know, to take us back to the other one, but
no, I think very valid. If there's anyone else who still has comments around the data issue, let's discuss it further and see if we can create some of this data that people are looking for. Kisa, yes, go ahead.
It was with the second question, aligning S with the E. I think sort of taking into account how buildings perform and how they impact the well-being of individuals and communities, that is sort of the end goal where we all want to get to. The issue is, how do we measure it, and what are the sort of the metrics that we use, and what kind of standards that we use? How do we get firms, organizations, investors, occupiers to record key data and metrics around these issues and be able to sort of, you know, track their progress? IRES has developed the IBOS standard, which I mentioned earlier in the panel. But again, it has to be sort of developed further. And the fact that the built environment needs to change, it needs to have a positive impact on society. While it has to sort of, the buildings have to get to net zero and be, you know, a sustainable green building, the impact that it has on the communities will be incredibly important. And the way we value buildings and how much, you know, buildings are valued within the community will be impacted on what the social impacts that it has on the community and the people who use it. So I think all of these instruments are very much interlinked, but we need to make sure that we develop the right metrics and the data to help us actually get there.
Great, thanks. And I think that's a good segue to the last question from the chat room. This one is for Francois, and anyone else can jump in as well. With regards to the sustainability disclosure requirements, what are the social discount rates that the public sector uses or that the public sector should be using?
Okay, I'm not going to go through the formula here, but it varies on it varies on another thing. I think there were UK numbers that had come out on social discount rates, and there's been an enormous debate whether this, I think it was 3%, and please, not to be quoted, I think I may even get it wrong, but there were views about this. And where the big discussion is how do we know what the future looks like? We're assuming that people in the future will be as wealthy as we are. They may well be wealthier. We got economic growth playing its role as well. So there's the question of how, over what period do you do it? I think there's the intergenerational 40 years that's, sort of is being used. So I'm not going to give you an answer because it is one that academically is being grappled with at the moment, and there's quite a debate as to what it should come to, and what we should be spending now, and what its value is in a future value, in a future value terms. But yeah, there's nothing easy about it. Look, I mean, social discount rates are not new. Social cost benefit analysis has been with us for many years. Public sector projects have been asking themselves, if we spend the money, will it have any impact? So, the social impact of public sector investments has certainly been there. The question is, can we bring those tools into the business world, and how we do that?
Thanks for that, Francois. Elaine, you're making an interesting point around the cost associated with data, and that it may continue to be a problem in the near future. Would you like to elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure. I've been on, like I was telling in the chat, I've been on the free the data train for, well, ever since I tried to do my dissertation back in 90 whatever. And it's really difficult. And I think it's going to get even more difficult, particularly after listening to today, because everybody's suggesting new metrics, new KPIs, new certification, And again, trying to get access to that information. And right now, at least here in the US real estate institutional world, we're having mergers, and those mergers potentially might result in less free data, i.e. Real Estate Capital Analytics, Bob White, fantastic guy, loved to give everybody his data. Well, he didn't give the commercial people data, but he gave all the academics data. Many of us are worried that that's going to be gone. Same thing with CoStar data. CoStar right now, great. If you can fill out all the different forms and swear that you won't, blah, 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 you can use CoStar data. Karen can help on that one. She's been trying to use their data for a long time. Same thing, with, well, those are the two main ones that I'm thinking of at the moment. And I do worry as they kind of get agglomerated up, they're buying those data sets. They're paying they paid $1 billion for capital analytics because there's value there. And they're not going to want to let the researchers use it because they're going to make money on that data. So I do really, really worry about it, because it's taken a long, long time. We were getting places, and I know Paul's right. Everybody's got to give information and prove they're doing it, but they're giving information and proving they're doing it to private companies who then, and again, the data is all hidden and we can't access. So, and the only way to try to understand markets is to have information and have data. And if you can't access it, it becomes really hard. And having been somebody that studied commercial real estate and one of the reasons housing is super, super well studied is the data is at least somewhat available, because we have public records that clearly show the house and the size and the et cetera, et cetera. So the researcher can easily do their analysis because they can get that data. And as we all know on this call, commercial real estate, particularly now that we're talking about social impacts of, development, it's it's just tough.
Yeah.
So I do worry. That
Karen,
it's gonna go
you're
backwards.
absolutely right. I get the sense that it's getting harder to get the data from your side of the fence. It's certainly
And we're
getting,
going to give up because we
well,
can't
it's
afford
only
to.
getting more expensive from my side of the fence. I don't know whether Megan has the same experience, but certainly my data budget is going in one direction and it's not down. And the only thing I can say is that you need to keep banging on what you've been doing for the last few decades and keep asking for that data.
I need some help, everybody. I need some help.
We need to, those of us who have perhaps some access to the MSCIs of this world, need to keep highlighting that providing access to academics is very, very important, and is something that benefits the the industry as a whole. But it is interesting if anybody else has any views, but certainly from my perspective, it's getting worse, not better.
Yeah, we do have about 5 minutes left. So are there any questions or comments from the audience? Anyone can feel free to jump in and add to the discussion.
Well, Patrick, we don't have to prolong it, just we don't get points for staying to the bitter end here or anything. I think personally, we've given it our best shot today. We've covered incredible amount of ground. Some topics were expected, others were just new topics. It's all given us some fresh food for thought. So with respect, Patrick, if I may end your Q&A session and bring the seminar to a close, but in doing so, I'd just like to ask first Francois and then Gunther if they've got any closing remarks on behalf of IRES and ERES.
Steve, let me take this opportunity to thank you for the enormous amount of work that went in there. For I think the number of emails that went through to organize speakers, panelists, and it's the committee which included IRES and ERES. I'm not going to go through all the names, but there's always a risk that you leave someone out, which I'm going to avoid. But really, I think that we couldn't have asked for a more apt subject than the S of ESG. As I said, it's something we would not have discussed 2 or 3 years ago. But I think if I really listen to what we did today, it shows the critical importance of the sector that we are dealing with. I think it shows that relationship that we have to society. The real estate sector builds the cities that people live in. And I think that really came out from the biggest projects we can get involved with to some of the smaller projects. It doesn't always need to cost a lot. But I think what came through during the course of the day is the interaction that we have with our stakeholders, that we listen to our stakeholders. And for me, this really came out. Now, and I will say immediately that from an IRES perspective this year, this is certainly not the last discussion that we're going to be having. In fact, we have a panel that will be running at the American Real Estate Society in a few weeks, which will be on the education track. We will also be taking the ESG issue further at the European Real Estate Society meeting in June. And then I think there will be a fantastic opportunity for us to also get the views from an emerging country context when we go to the African Real Estate Society, a Latin American society. We handle the issue there. So I think that as sister societies and areas, we have an opportunity to discuss this in very different contexts than what others are able to do it through the membership and network that we have. And then Gunther, also thank you very much for the technology, for making it work, for getting us all to Zoom, and of course in your position as the president of the European Real Estate Society, thank you for the collaboration that took place here. Fine, and I'd like to leave it at that. Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you for your contributions and for inspiring us to do this, Francois. Gunther, a few last words from you.
Yes, well, I would also like to join Francois in thanking you, Steve and Karen and others who were involved in organizing this, and also thanking Francois for the collaboration here. And to some extent, I feel like you were our guests here in the ERES industry seminar. And I hope we have been good hosts to the event. I was really, really impressed by the presentations and the discussions. These were very interesting, stimulating points, a lot of things to think about. But I would also like to highlight that, well, not just the topic we probably would not have discussed 2 years ago, but also we would not have discussed any topic in such a format 2 years ago, because we were not aware the technology was there at that time, but we were not aware of that. And if someone had proposed to do a virtual industry seminar, probably all others would have said, "Are you crazy? That's not going to work. No one will attend this." So I think we also demonstrated that we can have a very fruitful discussion that involves a substantial part of the world. Time zones kind of rule out to involve everyone, but you can involve a substantial part of the world in these discussions. And I would be very much in favor, and will make this argument tomorrow in the ERES board meeting, that we should continue events like that. May not be that we convert all our industry seminars to this format, but if not, then at least to come up with a common format where we collaborate across the organization with other organizations, and have very fruitful discussions. So with that, I would like to thank you all. Thanks, Steve, for being the moderator, and I wish you, well, usually one would say a safe trip home, but don't have to say this today.
Times changed, Gunther.
Times changed, yes, yes. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Gunther. Thanks so much for your help with the platform, which worked perfectly. I want to particularly thank Karen Gibler, who will be embarrassed by my gratitude, but she was the endless source of support for the committee, the organizing committee. And thanks for all the panelists and speakers who put a lot of time into some very, very high level thinking and presenting here. It's really set the bar and given us content to take forward and hopefully bring even more progress to our industry's contribution to the human side of our lives. So that's it from me. Everybody kept accurately on time. As a moderator, I really appreciate people's attention to the time, and it worked perfectly. So until next time, on perhaps this same format, Gunther. Thank you, everybody, from the bottom of my heart. It's been really fun and productive and educational, which is where we're coming from. Thank you.